Who do you think is the next star player that could be either on trade watch or leave via free agency? I asked Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype this when he was on the show about a week and a half ago. Everyone thought it could be Giannis with some of the comments that he was making, but then obviously the Bucks responded with the trade for Lillard. So, who is that star that you would kind of have in mind, or that teams are having in mind that are circling like vultures?
Yeah, I think the guy that a lot of teams are keeping an eye on is Trae Young in Atlanta. Obviously, they've been they're just kind of bouncing around, never really making that jump to being that contending team that they want to be. You're spending a lot of money bringing in DeJounte Murray, making these big trades. They finally, after years of rumors, executed a John Collins deal. But I think Trae Young is a guy to keep an eye on, because at some point, Atlanta's going to have to make some difficult decisions. And if it's just not working, if they're not getting to where they want to go, maybe he's a player that starts making enough noise that he winds up on the market out there. So that's the next guy. It would have been, like you said, it would have been Giannis, but since Dame arrived, I don't think he's going anywhere. Maybe on a lower tier, but Pascal Siakam is another guy certainly to keep an eye on, and he can be a really good player, really big impact piece. I've thought Toronto needed to make moves the last couple of years, and they've been heavy in rumors and then never actually got something done. But I look at what's happening in the Eastern Conference. I look at the arms race that's taking place right now between the Bucks and the Celtics. And I look at teams like the Knicks, teams like the Heat, teams like the Cavs, all these teams that are kind of in a second tier to those top two in the Eastern Conference. I think now, maybe not right now, but sometime mid-season, maybe a really good opportunity to sell off some pieces and get a great return from one of those teams that's trying to play catch up with the Bucks and the Celtics.
Yeah, we're in a really interesting spot. We're in a really interesting spot where, we've had rumors about Dame Lillard, Bradley Beal, Giannis in recent years, and now all of those situations either have resolved themselves or kind of quieted down. So, yeah, there's definitely an opening for, a team. If they do want to move a star player, they could, have basically the top star in the market. Obviously, James Harden, we'll see what happens with that. But, I think with how he's being viewed by other teams and kind of the market for him right now, it doesn't sound like he's on that same level as maybe a superstar that we're kind of talking about. So Harden would probably be the next star to be moved. But yeah, I think Trae Young, Siakam, those are really good answers. Scotto said Joel Embiid, just with everything kind of going on in Philly. I don't think I think Siakam and Young would probably happen first. But Embiid is certainly the big fish to kind of watch over the next year or two, probably, if they can't put pieces around him. I know he started making some of those little comments like Giannis did too about, I want to win a championship wherever it is, even if it's not in Philly. So he's kind of had some of those floaters as well, or things floated out there. So yeah, Embiid is also an interesting one to watch.
The timelines are tricky. If you're saying the next one, the other, then we get back to the question of how do you define, is it superstar? Is it star? Yeah. Because two guys who come to mind, they're on the same team, is Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. I think with Chicago, that could be a this year thing. That could be a trade deadline thing, depending on how the first few months of the season go. I think those are guys that a lot of teams have eyes on and are going to monitor those situations. Now, Joel Embiid is a higher tier player than both those guys. So in terms of the timeline, I think Joel's situation would be a next summer thing. And there's so much unknown between now and then, what ultimately happens in the James Harden situation. What do they get back? Once they get that return on that trade, and like I wrote yesterday, they then plan on, that's phase one for them. They then have to take all that stuff and go find a high-end player, to go help them title contend. So if they don't do that, if the season is an unmitigated disaster, where does that put Joel's mindset next summer? I think he is for sure on the top of the list of guys that teams are monitoring, but not as clear as I think. To me, the LaVine and DeRozan thing seems like a matter of time, even though the Bulls have kind of tried to frame it differently.
Two guys that Trevor mentioned, not on the same level as maybe Embiid or, to your point, LaVine, were Pascal Siakam and Trae Young. Do you think there's anything there potentially? I don't think those situations are necessarily, it's not like it's inevitable, but I think he was saying teams are probably monitoring those situations to see if maybe those guys could become available. And Siakam's been in trade rumors. I mean, that's not a huge surprise, but right. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, Siakam for sure. Pascal, his is funny because he wants, even with all the uncertainty and people not knowing what Masai Ujiri is going to do with the roster. And they took a lot of criticism the last 6 months for, you have Fred VanVleet coming up. You could have moved him for something. You let him go to Houston. All these different, curious moves or non-moves that have happened in Toronto. Siakam has continued to want to be in Toronto. But it does not appear that is, it's not that there's, any acrimony or animus towards Pascal, but it also doesn't seem, he's definitely somebody you can talk to the Raptors about, and the Raptors folks, or I'm sorry, Siakam's people absolutely have long since been convinced that, that they could pick up, get a phone call at any moment and he would be somewhere else, that they're not committed to him, even though, again, in his mind, in a perfect world, he'd be signing long-term to stay in Toronto. So Siakam is definitely a good name and a guy that is, I think has a pretty robust market out there. With Trae Young, and admittedly, I need to, we're starting the season now. I need to kind of circle back with some people and get more clarity. I haven't connected on the Hawks side for a while, but the way they finished, with Quinn Snyder and some of the progress they made, coaching wise with him and that group, and then the big changes that happened in the front office and some of the recalibrating organization wide that went on, my sense at that time was, what came with it was a recommitment to Trae Young. Now, it doesn't mean that he's not a guy that they'll listen to and about. There have been moments when I think that, their owner, Tony Ressler, looked at it and was kind of reflecting on the Trae Young experience. But right now, that would surprise me a lot. I think that is still in their eyes, he's the best thing going for them. And even if I think there's a ceiling on where you can go with him as your number one guy, I don't see him going anywhere anytime soon.